This is the first whisper of the East. For more, subscribe and like this video. In the Sundarbans, April is the month of sweet death. This is when narrow channels clog up with the scent of mangrove blossoms. It is honey season. For us the Moualis, the traditional honey gatherers, it is the only time to make a year's living, but it can come with a steep cost. We usually head to the forest in groups of 5 or 6. We carry torches of dried leaves called kanti. Before you enter, you stop at a Bono baby shrine. You don't joke, you don't ask for luck, you ask for permission. So the thing is, the old-timers never call each other by name once the boat enters the mud banks. They use numbers, they use whistles, they use silence. Because in the deep interior, where the salt water meets the fresh, there lives something which existed in this very land long before even we came along. A creature that has no skin of its own, waiting for you to make a mistake so it can be you. My name is Manik. I was a honey collector for 15 years. I have scars on my back from the giant honeybees and even deeper scars on my soul. Tonight, I'm going to tell you why I'll never touch a drop of honey again, and why, if you hear your brother calling you from the forest, you run. There were 4 of us that year. Myself, my younger brother Montu, and 2 cousins, Rofik and Nitai. Montu was young. It was just his second season. He was fast, he was talkative. He didn't understand that every word spoken in the Sundarbans is a seed planted in the mud. "Look at the size of that hive, Manik," he shouted, pointing to a branch of a tree hanging over the water. It was massive, a black pulsing heart of a hive, dripping with liquid gold. "Shh, Rule 1. No names. I am 1, you are 2. He rolled his eyes, the arrogance of youth shielding him from the weight of the forest. We tied the boat and stepped into the mud. It was knee-deep, the kind of silt that feels like it's trying to steal the marrow out of your bones. We lit the kanti. The thick, acrid smoke rose, dazing the bees. Nitai and Rafik began the climb. Montu stood at the base holding the basket. Everything was going perfectly. A bit too perfect. Then the wind shifted. The smoke, usually a wall of protection, was blown aside by a sudden cold gust. A wind that smelled not of salt, but of rust. Montu screamed, not a loud scream, but a sharp, wet gasp. I turned. Montu was standing there, his hand over his face, and between his fingers I saw something thin and translucent, like a strand of spider silk pulled taut from the darkness of the trees to his cheek. "What? Help me!" he cried. Before I could move, the strand retracted. It didn't break. It dragged Montu into the dense mangrove roots with the force of a falling anchor. He didn't even have time to drop the basket. He was just gone. We searched for hours. We broke the rules. We screamed his name until our throats were raw. "Montu! Montu!" The forest echoed us, but the echoes, they were wrong. They came back a second too late. They sounded hollow, like a voice being projected through a pipe. But as the sun began to dip below the canopy, turning the mud into a color of fresh bruise, we heard him. "Manik, I'm over here, Manik." It was Montu's voice, perfectly pitched. It was Montu's voice, perfectly pitched. The same slight lisp he'd had since he was a child. He stumbled out of the dense forest about 50 yards away. He looked fine. His clothes were muddy, yes, but he was smiling. I tripped, he said. wiping the mud from his brow. The roots got me. I'm sorry, Juan. We were so relieved, we didn't even notice the tells. Now that I look, I see them all. I see how his wasn't tattered from the bee stings, even though he'd been standing right under the hive. I see how his shadow on the mud didn't match the way he was standing. It was too long, too jagged. But the most terrifying detail was the way he moved his jaw. When Montu spoke, his lower jaw didn't move up and down. It moved in a slight circle, like a grinding stone. That night on the boat, we huddled together. The smoke from our fire was the only thing between us and the blackness. "Do," I said, looking at Montu. "You're very quiet." He was staring at the honey we had collected. It was sitting in a jar between us. He wasn't looking at it with hunger. He was looking at it with recognition. "It's sweet, isn't it?" Montu whispered, with his eyes widened unnaturally and his pupils dilated. He reached into the jar with his bare hand. He didn't use a spoon. He thrust his entire hand into the viscous honey. When he pulled it out, the honey didn't drip off of his skin. It was absorbed into it. His skin drank the honey like a sponge, and then his skin began to bubble. Rofik saw it first. He pointed, his fingers trembling. Manik, his elbow? I looked. Where Montu's elbow should have been, the skin had split, but there was no bone underneath. There was only a mass of vibrating amber-colored fibers. They looked like the honeycomb itself, but made of pulsing flesh. "Montu, Montu," I whispered, reaching for my machete. "Montu isn't here," the thing said with a voice which sounded ancient. The joy in its voice was bone-chilling, but what followed was the skin on his face began to slide. It moved towards the left as if it were a mask that had lost its adhesive. His right eye moved down to his cheek. His mouth migrated towards his ear. "The name was so sweet," the thing gurgled. "The memory of his mother. It tasted like hibiscus. The memory of his home. It tasted like rain." It stood up. Its body didn't have a structure. It moved like a heavy curtain caught in a breeze. It began to unfold itself towards Nitai. Nitai didn't even have time to scream. The thing didn't bite him. It wrapped around him. It draped its translucent, honey-scented flesh over his body, seeking out the seams of his skin. I watched in a paralysis of pure horror as the creature began to peel Nitai. It didn't use a knife. It used its own surface to bond with Nitai's skin and then lift it off of him in one continuous wet sheet. The sound was like wet cloth being pulled apart, a sound that made my blood curdle and my eyes water. By the time the creature was done, Nitai was a raw, red mass of muscle and screaming nerves. The creature looked more like Nitai than Nitai ever had. It was refining the shape. It was getting better at the lie. I didn't stay to see what it did with the rest of him. We jumped. Rofik and I jumped. I hit the freezing salt-clogged water and swam. I didn't swim for the shore, no. I swam through the middle of the channel, hoping the tide would take me. I blindly swam, and behind me from the boat I heard my own voice calling me back. Manik, don't leave. It's cold. One, please. It was my voice, my pitch, my fear. The forest had finally learned the shape of a man who was leading the hunt. I was found 2 days later clinging to a floating log near some random muddy shore. They took me to the village. They fed me. They told me I was lucky. They said the rest of my crew must have been taken by a tiger. A tragedy, they said. But the forest takes its toll. I kept on asking about where Rofik was, but the villagers, they were clueless. I didn't tell them the truth. Who'd believe that the honey we bring back is sometimes the only thing left of us? I finally went home to my wife and my young son. I tried to live. I tried to forget the sound of the unpeeling, but 3 months ago my brother Montu walked into the village. He looked perfect. He had the same scar on his chin. He had the same laugh. He told everyone he'd been rescued by a passing group of honey gatherers. The village celebrated. They threw a feast. But that night, I went to his house. I watched him through the window. He was sitting on a mat alone, the room lit by a hurricane lamp. He wasn't eating the rice mother had made. He was sitting with a jar of honey, looking at it with crazed and obsessed eyes. In the dim light of the lamp, I saw his back. It wasn't skin. It was like a translucent beehive-like pattern, rippling with vibrations like that of the bees buzzing. He didn't see me, but he smiled. And as he smiled, a single drop of amber liquid leaked from his tear duct. He reached up, wiped it away and licked it. "Sweet," he whispered. I didn't kill him. I couldn't. How do you kill a memory that has stolen your brother's face? I left the village that night. I live in the city now, far from the trees, far from the water. But every time I walk past a market and smell the scent of blooming flowers, every time I see a jar of honey on a shelf, I feel my own skin start to itch. I feel a tightness behind my ears, a seam that wasn't there before. The Sundarban isn't a forest, it's a hive. And once it has tasted your name, it will never stop trying to find the rest of you. Shubharatri, sleep lightly.